Right, recording. Okay, I will now call this meeting of the South Dallas Fair Park Opportunity Fund to order. It is Wednesday, September 15th, and the time is 6:04 p.m. Ms. Lowe, can you start us off with a roll call, please?
I sure can. Michelle Akers,
Here, Michelle Akers, Mecca.
Macca, okay. William Dawkins,
Here.
Leander Johnson,
Here.
Pat Parrish, Patsy Parrish, Kimberly Sims, I see her. Kimberly Sims,
Here.
Sonia Smith, Destiny, I can't pronounce that last name.
It's okay, but I'm here.
Sykes. Well, I'll just go with Sykes. Mr. Chair, we do have a quorum.
Okay, thank you very much. I believe everybody's received the minutes from the last meeting. If there are no changes, everybody should have reviewed those by now. If there are no changes, can I get a motion to approve on that?
I make a motion to approve the minutes as written.
A second.
Motion by Ms. Sims, do we have a second?
A second.
Who is that?
That's
Sonia.
Yes. All right, we have a second. Minutes approved. Thank you very much. Oh, excuse me. All in favor? Excuse me.
Aye.
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 Any opposed? None opposed? Minutes approved. All right, we'll move along to agenda item number 4, which is going to be the review of the South Dallas Fair Park Opportunity Fund Economic Development Program. Before we jump into that, first of all, I want to start off by thanking everybody on this call, particularly for the work that everybody did during our last meeting, during our last NOFA cycle, to get approval to the organizations that we got to apply. If you recall, last year in the middle of COVID, initially we weren't going to have a NOFA process, a grant process. We were able to get that opened up and then subsequently end up getting that window extended and ultimately ended up getting, I believe, 16 applicants within about a 3-week period, which is extraordinary. So I want to thank everybody on the call for that and the work that you guys did with that and making sure that we continue to adhere to our commitment to get money out to the community. I know at one point Michelle was going door to door, literally going door to door. And so once again, thank you all for your commitment. And I know that Heather's going to give us an update on what the timing is going to be for the next NOFA funding round. And so she'll touch on that a little later in the call. So thanks again for that, because I know how important everybody's time is and your commitment to that. And hopefully we can keep building on that momentum and get that out again soon. So for the purposes of this meeting, what I want to talk about, I know we have a couple of new people. Destiny, you're new. If you want to give yourself give a quick introduction really quickly.
Sure. My name is Destiny Sykes Okumabwa. I am the South Dallas Phyllis Wheatley president of our neighborhood. I'm pretty involved with our neighborhood association as well as our local partners in churches, just to ensure that our neighbors are getting the support and voice that they need as decisions have been made regarding our neighborhood. So
thank you very much. Glad you're here, and I really look forward to working with you and plugging you into all the work that we're doing currently. So I appreciate that. Circling back around to the purpose of today's meeting, I just want to reiterate, number one, what the South Dallas Fair Park Opportunity Fund is all about. By the end of tonight's call, I want there to be a clear understanding of, number one, just reiterate the purpose. We're going to talk a little bit about how the fund is funded. Heather will touch on that a little bit. We're going to talk about the loan component of our fund. There's 2 components to our program. There's a grant component, and there's also a loan component. So I want everybody to have a clear understanding of how that works, the approval process, and how we go through that. And then I also want to talk about some of the ways that we can brainstorm to help drive awareness to some of the things that we're doing. So in terms of purpose, it really comes down to a couple of key points. Number one, how do we drive economic development and economic growth? How do we create more jobs? And how do we help provide the resources and training to those small businesses so that folks can actually occupy those jobs when they come to the community? So we really want to focus on that. And against that backdrop, I've formed 3 key initiatives. The first of which is being, how do we increase the awareness of the Opportunity Fund? In my experience talking to a lot of you, most folks aren't really aware of the Opportunity Fund or that it even exists. And as that continues, that's going to continue to be a headwind for us, because then folks don't know what's available out there for them to use. And secondarily, they don't know how to get into the pipeline and access that money that we have available. So that's one thing that we want to focus on that we can actually do something about. So I want to focus on that, number one. Number two, I want us to continue to, and we've talked about this before, help identify the types of businesses that we want to see in our community. For example, anything that has to do with education, technology, healthcare, broadband internet access. All these things are things that our community desperately needs, and we want to be actively targeting those types of businesses as we look to drive economic development in the South Dallas Fair Park census tracts. And number three, I want us to continue to help identify partners and organizations that we can link up with, so that when folks come into our pipeline, we actually have an opportunity to direct them as to the path of how to, number one, get the funding. Number two, if you've got a small business that's looking to start or either grow, give them a clear sense of what resources are available and how to access them, and how we can assist them in that process. So, obviously we've seen, over the last 10 years or so, unprecedented economic development and growth all around Dallas and the region, frankly. But we also have to be mindful of the fact that that hasn't happened in all parts of our community. And historically, particularly as it relates to this board, there have been parts of our community that have been overlooked and underserved, which is where we come in and we want to try to fill that gap wherever we can. So recognizing that, that kind of sets the table for what we're trying to do and what our purpose is. So I'm going to turn it over to Heather, and we're going to go through the presentation, and we're going to outline the history and the background of the fund, number one. We're going to talk a little bit about the amendments that have occurred. There have been some changes and amendments to the original structure of the fund. And so we're going to take a look at that and how that translates to how it's set up today. We're going to look at funding sources. So how is the Opportunity Fund funded? Where do those monies come from, and how they're allocated? We're going to look at the loan process and the underwriting of that and how that occurs and the mechanics of that. And then we're also going to look at award limits and approval limitations in terms of size and approval levels. So at the end of this presentation, we're going to have time for a little bit of Q&A. So I ask that everybody holds your questions until the end. And then, being mindful of everybody's time, if we can all, be mindful of that and ask questions that are direct and particularly related to what we're talking about, so that we can get through everybody's questions and get through as many as we can. Okay. So with that said, I'll turn it over to Heather, and I'll let her jump into the presentation.
Okay, thank you. Heather, before you get started, this is Michelle. I just wanted to remind everyone that your face has to be visible. So anyone that's not in camera, please turn your camera so that your face is visible. And to be able, in order to count you as part of the meeting, as part of the quorum, you have to be visible at all times. Thank you. think you're muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, we're trying to use one audio in this room and I'm on a separate computer, and so it's a little bit, but otherwise there's massive feedback. So if I'm gonna put Corey, if you start, because you're on my screen right now, if you can't hear me, just make a weird face or something and I'll talk louder, okay? All right, thank you. All right, so as the chairman said, I'm gonna go a little bit over the background and history and then a little bit of detail of the economic development program. I'm keeping this pretty high level, so if you want more details, feel free to ask questions at the end or at the end as the chairman said. So for the background and history, under the current program statement, the purpose of the South Dallas Fair Park Opportunity Fund is to provide loans and grants to promote economic development and support human development initiatives in the neighborhoods surrounding the Fair Park area. The loans and grants can only be issued to entities that are located within, relocating to, or serving a population of at least 90% residents of the service area. And there are 11 census tracts that make up the service area, and the one that you can see that is shaded a different color was added in 2018, so that was one of the expansions of the service area relatively recently. So in 2018, the Opportunity Fund went under some pretty significant changes. The program actually dates back to the 80s, and it's had a variety of different rules and purposes, but right now we're under the amendment from 2018. What it did from the change from 2015 was it changed the name from the South Dallas Fair Park Trust Fund to the South Dallas Fair Park Opportunity Fund. It identified the purpose of providing loans and grants, and it tightened it up a little bit. Under the 2015 rules, the trust fund was made available to primarily support activities to assist residents, businesses, and programs in the target census tracts, business relocations to the area, or activities that would benefit the area. And so that was much broader than what the purpose is today. Because now it's limited to economic development and the supporting human development initiatives. And to further define economic development and human development, the program statement established $100,000 for human development grants, and that's $100,000 annually that could be awarded under the human development grants. And then the remainder of the fund was for economic development projects. And under the economic development projects, some of that can be granted, but the vast majority of that would be awarded as a loan. So the biggest impact from these changes is really moving away from social services, grant funding, and more focus on economic development activities. So a little bit more about the economic development projects. It's a pretty flexible tool. The terms are negotiated on a case-by-case basis. The funding is relatively flexible. The eligible projects are really defined as projects that create or retain jobs, or they increase the tax base. So that covers a broad amount of projects. It's not restricted to any industry. It's not restricted to any specific, you must create 7 new jobs. There's no numeric goals with that description. And for-profits and nonprofits are both eligible. The contracts do have some reporting, and again, the specific goals that they would have to hit is one of the 4 that are listed on the screen, which would be creation of jobs, retention of jobs, increase the service area tax base, or stimulate small business activity and growth. As far as the process, we have an intake form that's pretty straightforward. It's an Excel file, and then there can also be attachments. It includes a project description, the identified funding that a project already has, the sources and uses for the project, financial information about the organization, and identified gaps in funding. Once we get that form and the related documents, staff will review it and we'll look at making sure that we can understand what the project is and that we've identified a gap and that there is a need for funding, because we can only fund projects that have a gap. We can't just give awards under the Economic Development Program. The terms of any award would be negotiable. The interest is likely to be 3% or less. The repayment term, like the years, number of years, can vary depending on what is needed. And per the program statement, no more than 25% of the recommended funding can be awarded as a grant. Once staff has done a review, and if they think it's a viable project, it will be sent for third party for underwriting. And then that report comes back, and then it will go to the Opportunity Fund Board. And if it is a project that we can process administratively, we can process it through an administrative action under the program statement. That threshold is $50,000. And if it's higher than what's allowed under the program statement, then we'd go to the Economic Development Committee, and then we go to Council for approval. So this is a slide that shows what the projects have been awarded under the past 5 grant cycles. You'll see in 2013 through 2017, that was under the previous program statement, so that doesn't align with the funding categories that we have right now. The CBN stands for the Community-Based Nonprofit, and you can see that there was roughly, an average probably about $400,000 a year that was awarded. I will say what was actually spent was going to be significantly lower than what was awarded, because either some of the grants got canceled or the grant cycle just didn't work out as well. And so we never fully expended, or we never fully reimbursed for what the awards were for. And you can also see that there were a couple special grants that were awarded, and that category isn't under our current program statement. And then the 2019-2020 reflects the switch to the human development grants. And for last year, you awarded 77,000 of human development grants, and I didn't put that in, but that was recent. And then as far as the funding sources, in 2018, the amendment clarified the funding sources, and the funds are the general fund, fair park activities, pilot, and then revenue. The general fund is no longer contributing to the South Dallas Fair Park Opportunity Fund. The final payment was made in 2020, and that was $800,000, and that was an agreement that went through council. So that wasn't a fund that fund will not be currently renewed. That the rest of this is still viable. Fair park activities. So if there's a ticket sold at the amphitheater, 20 cents goes to the Opportunity Fund, and then half of the profits from flea markets and antique shows that would go to Fair Park, half of that also comes to the Opportunity Fund. The Parks and Recreation Department makes the determination of how much money that is, and if it's less than $500,000, then the Office of Economic Development will allocate a portion of its pilot funding, so that there's $500,000 of annual revenue basically coming in to the Opportunity Fund. And then the last category is revenue. That would include operating revenue, like loan repayments and earned interest. And because of that, that's why the loan structure is set up, so that there will be money coming back into the Opportunity Fund. If it's purely grant, it's going to get depleted. And then finally, the current cash balance. Right now, there's approximately $6 million of funding available under the Opportunity Fund. And we can go through that in more detail if you're interested, but the net result is right now there's about $6 million. And with that, I will open it up for discussions and questions, unless.
Yeah, we'll open it up for questions. I see Ms. Sims. Ms. Sims, go ahead.
I have several questions, so you can stop me or tell me I need to wait. My first question is, one of the 4 goals that you're saying that applicants need to hit on to be considered for trust fund dollars is an increase in the service area tax base. How are you calculating that, and are you showing any significant growth in the tax base with the funds that are given by the trust? That are provided by the Opportunity Fund?
So I mean, that would be that we know that they're making improvements to the building. And then the assumption would be that that would increase the tax base. I mean, we could look up the DCAD valuation, and then if you're putting in, $200,000 of improvements, that would meet that metric. And Marichelle, do you want to add anything to that, or?
So I asked that question because that would be if that's something that staff is tracking, that's a great point to pull out how the program is, contributing to the economic viability of the service area.
And I don't have anything to add, Heather. You're correct.
Then also, who are we using as a third-party underwriter
The
to
city
review
has
the
a
loan
variety.
applications?
Yeah, the city has, NDC is one of the organizations under contract. I believe they have a couple others pending to be the underwriter, but NDC is the one I'm the most aware of.
So are those costs associated with the independent or the third-party underwriter? Is that a part of the operating funds of the opportunity fund, or is that just out of the general fund of the city?
I don't actually have an answer to that. We haven't gotten any applications that have gotten that far recently. So I don't have an answer for that, but that's something we can answer for you later.
Okay, and this is my last question. I'm sorry, I'm dominating the first part of this conversation, but I see that the amount that we get from the ticket sales at the JEXA doesn't seem to have increased in many years, and I may be remembering wrong, but it seems like it's been either 20 or 25 cents on the ticket on per each ticket for a long time now, like at least for the last 2 decades. And if that is the case, if I'm remembering this correctly, has there been any talk about possibly increasing the amount that is provided to the trust fund per ticket?
I am not sure how the formula was originally determined, and I'm not sure if it was something that was written in the ordinance when the Opportunity Fund Trust Fund was made. I will have to get back to you on that.
But I'm just asking, has the amount increased? And I will tell you, I used to work for the South Dallas Fair Park Trust Fund. So I kind of remember what the dollar amount was, and it seems to have not increased by much. And I left there in 2005, so I've been gone a while. So that's a long time to not have an increase. If we're serious about economic viability and vitality in the area.
So Ms. Sims, what you're asking, just to summarize, I think your question is twofold. Number one, who governs that process, right, to determine what that increase, if any, will be, and then number two, if there has in fact been an increase by this governing body, what has that been? And is there some sort of a progressive scale to make sure we're keeping up with the times? Is that kind of where you're going?
Yes, I mean, I just want to make sure that, the fund has. I was happy to see a $6 million bottom line there. I'm really excited about that because I don't remember that much money ever being in the fund as I was keeping up with it. And there's a lot of good that we can, that can be done with those funds. Really understanding what kind of businesses the area needs and kind of the things we need to put in place to attract those types of businesses. But it just seems like, if we've been at 20 to 25 cents, since the 80s or what have you, do we expect that to be increased? And I think that negotiation may have been done, or maybe the park board had something to do with it. I'm not remembering correctly. It may have been the park board, but now that there is another entity managing Fair Park, how does that play into that as well? So that's just my question.
And just to add on to what you said, Ms. Sims, going back to the funding sources, it's my understanding, and this may be a Marshall question, but it's my understanding that part of the reason why there were catch-up payments from the general fund was because we had a shortfall with the Fair Park activities and something with the calculation. And that's kind of what prompted that initially, right? Ms. Samples or Heather is.
Now, we'll tell you that the catch-up payments was way after my time, so I can't speak to that. But I'm sure staff can.
Okay.
I really can't speak to that either.
Okay. But should we, pulling forward to now, should we have a shortfall now, those monies would primarily come from the pilot. Am I understanding that correctly?
Correct. If the Fair Park activities doesn't generate $500,000 a year, then ECO will make up the difference. If the Fair Park activities generate more than $500,000 a year, the Opportunity Fund just gets it.
Okay.
Is there any, and I said that was my last question, but I promise that this is my last question. Is there any synergy between the Opportunity Fund programs and what the bigger economic development department initiatives are? Is there any cross-pollination there?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of cross-reference for projects. So if there was a project that comes in generally and it's within the service area, we always mention this as a funding source. And I mean, honestly, there are more projects, more conversations about economic development projects in the past 2 months than I had in a year and a half. And I think I've had 4 different, substantial conversations with people who actually have, are past the ideation phase, like are actually at a real project. Actually 5 projects in the past 2 months. One ended up not needing a loan, but 4 of them are still in differing stages of consideration. None of them have turned in their intake form. So it just takes a while to get a project that's ready to go. But I would guess that at least 2 of those 4 would turn in an intake form.
Thank you. With that, I will go on mute and give somebody else a chance.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ms. Sims. We have any other questions? If so, I'll jump in with a few questions myself. Number one, how do we, to Ms. Sims's point, there are a number of programs under the economic development umbrella, our program being one of them. Is there a way, or do we have the capacity to somehow consolidate the intake process to where there's a single point of entry for anybody who wants to apply for assistance from the city, whether it be through our fund or through another channel, so that they don't have to hop on the website, for example, and to come into the program or apply for assistance, and then apply for something that they don't qualify for and get turned down when they would have qualified for something else under that umbrella and they just didn't know, and then they go away, right? Is there a way to consolidate that, have a single point of entry, and then perhaps have city staff direct each project based on what the request is, the appropriate channel to streamline it a little bit more?
So we basically do that already.
Okay.
And the intake form for South Dallas Fair Park is substantially easier than the general incentives intake form.
Okay.
So when we have a project that might qualify for multiple, we start with the South Dallas Fair Park Opportunity Fund form because it's much more user-friendly and less intimidating than our normal intake application. There's also a short form application on the website that's only 2 pages that is really, really basic. And so if we get that, then we'll call in the regular, the different department program managers to make sure that we're matching the funding to the right program.
Okay. And how do we currently market in terms of print and digital media? How do we market the program now to potential applicants? I mentioned a little earlier that a lot of people just aren't aware that the fund exists, right? And so it's hard to get any traction in terms of getting money out the door for us if folks don't know it exists. Do we have something in place that we're actively working towards in terms of an actual campaign that's recurring so that we can push that awareness out to the community? And if we don't, is that something that we can work on? And in terms of funding that, is that something that the city can fund or something that will come out of the general fund? Or would it come out of our budget from the South Dallas Fair Park Opportunity Fund to fund those campaigns if that's what was needed?
So I would say as a whole, we're not awesome at marketing. And so that's part of the reason, if you've been following the conversations about a new economic development plan, there's a proposal to create a new economic development entity to really take the lead on marketing, because that's not something that the city generally is very good at. So, there's information on the website, certainly, there's social media, but as far as a dedicated marketing campaign for South Dallas Fair Park Opportunity Fund, that right now isn't going to happen or isn't happening. But that would be something that we would then push to the EDC as that gets rolled out.
Is there a way for us to perhaps, for the purposes of what we're trying to do now, can we third party that out, much like we do the underwriting, just to get something going until that program gets stood up by the city? Is that something that we have the ability to do or get a green light on?
I will have to check into that, and I will also have to, we'd have to issue an RFP, I think, to get a marketing person on board for that. But let me get back to you.
Okay. How do we, does anyone else have any questions before I continue on with a few more questions?
I have some questions.
Who said
This
that?
is
Ms. Mecca?
Michelle.
Go ahead, Ms. Mecca.
Yeah. So the fairparkfirst.org is the nonprofit that is responsible for anything held within Fair Park. They report their monetary stuff to Parks and Rec. Parks and Rec does not report to City Council. So it's a little confusing, when you're trying to, get funding or see what the funding is, and your City Council's like, what are you even talking about? So I've heard it not just from Fair Park, but just Parks and Recs in general. There's a definite, Parks and Rec in Dallas is huge. They bring in a lot of money and they spend a lot of money. So for City Council not to know what money's going in and out is, I think, a pretty big deal. I guess that's just a statement. My other thing was, how were the success of the grants that were approved, and was there any follow-up from anyone from economic development with the applicants?
Yeah, let's to that question. I know we have Heather's going to go over that when she talks a little bit about the news cycle. So let's hold that question and then let's finish up this round of questioning pertaining to the mechanics, and then we'll get that answered, Ms. Mecca, and get some information on that. As it relates to this topic and the mechanics of the fund and questions about funding, does anyone else have questions on that?
Pat has it. Pat Parrish.
Ms. Parrish?
You're muted.
Ms. Parrish?
I think you're muted.
I think we have 2 hands raised. Who else is in the queue here?
Mecca, but she just.
Oh, okay. Ms. Parrish, you're muted.
She's not muted, but she's not, her audio's not working. We can't hear her.
Okay. Well, while she figures that out, I'll ask another question.
Marichelle, did you want to say something?
Yes, I was just going to note that if someone is having any audio or video issues, they're not actually counted as part of the meeting. So, Ms. Parrish, if you could see if you can adjust your volume, that would be great.
There might.
But you can move on to the next person while she tries to do that, because we still have enough to keep the quorum.
Okay.
The other option is you could call in for the audio. Do you want to call in for the audio? I can put the phone number in the chat. Would that work, Marichelle?
Yes, but you would have to leave your video on as well.
Correct. But, all right, I'll put the phone number in the chat.
Mr. Chair, I had a question.
Go ahead, Mr. Dawkins.
You mentioned up front in your remarks, healthcare, tech, educational opportunities, and internet access were 4 of the business types or industry silos that you're targeting. What's been our success in the target geography with those kinds of businesses?
You asked what's been our experience. Is that what you said?
Correct. Have we funded any business types like that in the history of the trust fund or the opportunity fund?
I don't believe that we have, Mr. Dawkins.
We funded Fraser FRI when they did the Parkland Clinic.
Okay.
So that would be the one example of a healthcare project. And that was, some bridge funding and some, as they were moving really quickly to get that Parkland Clinic open prior to some federal Medicaid or federal funding deadlines. And that was in about 7 years ago, 2014.
Okay. And so no educational, no internet access, or no other tech, so to speak, generally speaking.
There's been quite a few social service grants for education. And in this most recent grant cycle, there's a lot of, again, there's grants for tutoring programs, GED, or not GED, ACT and SAT prep. And then on the, there's been other healthcare grants, but as far as like business projects, FRI would be the one example of that. That's a real estate project, but there's certainly been programmatic grants and both healthcare and education.
Very well. Next question, the human development grants, can you expand on the scope of what that might entail?
Yeah, so there's 5 categories for the human development grants that I think it's public safety, healthcare. Oh, and I should have brought it in front of me. Hold on, give me 1 minute and I'll pull up the categories. Let's see.
I'm gonna write it down.
So workforce participation and readiness, small business activity and growth, health outcomes, public safety, and educational outcomes. So each grant that would be awarded would be into one of those 5 categories.
Got it. Thank you.
And so I think Mr. Dawkins, just as an extension to your question there, I think what we're trying to do and what we're seeking to do is try to find ways to continue along those themes, but figure out a way to fund things that are actually creating jobs, right? And that's kind of the goal. The grants and human development grants are great, but we want something that's actually creating jobs and giving opportunities for folks that live in these communities to actually occupy those jobs that are created that are under these various umbrellas. And by no means that was meant to be an exhaustive list of the only thing that we're looking for. But that's kind of the general idea in the direction that I'm hoping we can go. So if that provides a little.
And I apologize, I've not seen, or I don't know if an underwriting package or a sample template has been distributed. But I would imagine together with your marketing initiative, you would have certain themes in the marketing initiative that would point people toward your desire for healthcare, tech, educational access, et cetera. And then in your underwriting package, you would certainly score those packages such that those who have job creation prospects scoring higher than those who didn't. Would that be a fair assumption?
Right now,
Yes.
we're not right now, we would be, any project that is financially feasible, we would bring to the board. We haven't had overwhelming demand to have to prioritize to the industries. So we could do that if we had, more projects and we have funds, but right now we're in the opposite boat.
So I get what you're saying. Let me see if I can clarify my question a little bit. If I were applying and I had to fill out an underwriting package or a packet of intake information, and I knew in advance that I would get scored higher if my package or my proposal were creating jobs, I would gear my proposal toward that, as opposed to just writing or submitting a pro forma or projections of my business plan. Do we score them that way, or do we just look at them ad hoc as they're given to us and then go forward from there? Does that make sense?
Yeah, we're not giving additional points or priority points for job creation, for numbers of jobs created on a scale, but on the intake form, it is something that is captured in different fields. So we know what that number is when they submit their intake form. But again, because we have more money than projects, we're open to all the ways of all projects at this point.
Get as much money out as possible.
Yeah.
Understood.
Okay, I called in. Can everyone hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Mr. Dawkins, one quick second.
I was just double checking so I could raise.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We can hear you. Thank you so much. Mr. Dawkins, did you have any more questions, or did you?
Would it be possible to get an underwriting template? Or if there's not one available, maybe an underwriting packages of some that have already been approved?
I'm happy to send the intake form. We haven't gotten a single complete packet back, so we don't have the whole underwriting packet yet. But I can send you the intake form so you can see what we're asking for. I'll send that out to the whole board.
Very well. Thank you.
Okay. Can I make a comment? It's not a question. To Mr. Dawkins.
Go quickly, Ms. Mecca.
When we received all the grants last year, there are particular points on each, do you have this? Do you have that? It's like 5 points for this, 10 points for that. And I specifically went over each one, and if something was missing, yes, I did. For me personally, I marked that, a point needs to be taken off. So I had a check. So I did have a list of, who had everything, who made all their 10 points on this section and who didn't. I don't know who else did that, but I read all 300 pages of the grants. I'm sure you'll get the opportunity to do the same thing.
Very
too.
well.
Well, that's the goal. The goal is to get more applications in the pipeline so we can have more of these types of conversations. So, Mr. Dawkins, did you have any other questions?
No, sir. Good to go. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Parrish?
Okay, I have a couple of questions on the PowerPoint. I noticed that the general fund is no longer contributing to this project. Is there a reason why the general fund is not contributing? And the second part is I saw PPP. What is that funding, the PPP?
So the general fund contribution was negotiated to make up the discrepancy between what the Fair Park activities had been contributing, and so it was a one-time fix. I think it was paid out over 4 years, but don't quote me on that, but it was paid out a variety of years, and I think it was 3.2 million in total, to kind of make whole the trust fund or the opportunity fund for funding it hadn't received previously. I think the other reference is to pilot, and or PPP, and that's payment in lieu of taxes. So that's money that our department gets from the water department, DWU, as kind of an internal transfer. And it's funding that our department uses for its incentive program.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Okay. Are there any other questions on this particular topic? Anything about the mechanics, funding, underwriting? If not, we will move on. And Heather, can you give us a quick update on our last round of award recipients and give some information on when the next cycle will be opening?
Yeah, and I'm pretty open to when the next cycle is opening, and so I actually want to discuss that, and let's talk through that and have the board make some recommendations for that. So, there were 6 that were awarded under the last cycle for about $77,000. Of those 6, 1 is under contract. The second one is the contract. We have 2 contracts pending with the city attorney's office. We have 2 additional, one that has provided a scope of work to us, and the 5th one, we're still waiting on the scope of work from the grantee. The 6th one is not eligible under the Human Development Program because it's a construction project, and they don't have a service that they need to have under the human development side to get funding. So the most we will do is the 5 grants. And then, I will say it takes, as it's now September, and I think you made the recommendations in February. The notification letters, I think, went out in March. I know I had a kickoff meeting with them in April, early April. It takes a really long time to get these from, award to contract. And when the grant amounts are smaller, it's just more pieces. So it's, something that the board might want to consider is doing larger grants as opposed to smaller grants for the next grant cycle. And on previous board, on other boards, staff will rank the grants and make a recommended funding recommendation. And I'm not sure how this was set up, but I think there was probably more discussion on each of the projects on an individual basis. And so just from an administrative standpoint and time standpoint, that might make more sense, but I'm open to doing whatever you guys want to do. But recognize that it takes longer than I think. It always takes longer than we think it's going to, even when we have staff working on it pretty diligently, checking in pretty frequently. Corey calls grant recipients once every week, once every 2 weeks, checking in. I have other staff working on it too. It's just slower than we would like it to be. And one of the other things that we might want to do is, if they haven't submitted their scope of work by date certain, they're no longer eligible for funding. I mean, we might want to consider putting in some deadlines, but we didn't do that because that wasn't something we had discussed and that didn't seem fair. So anyway, you know, I'm open to any and all ideas. You know, we can open the grant cycle as soon as October, if that's what people want to do, with the goal of getting awards announced in February again. Or we can wait until January 1 or early in the next year. Anyway, I just would like some guidance, I guess, from the board on that.
Sure. To that point, Heather, the idea last year with having a greater number of recipients, perhaps than in previous cycles, the idea was, given our limited capacity to actually vet out some of our applicants, the idea is we didn't want to lean too heavily in one direction or another, having not had the opportunity to really speak with somebody that perhaps may be asking for a large dollar amount, right? So the idea was, okay, so that we don't lean too heavily in one direction with limited information, let's kind of govern the grant and award amounts this time around. However, in light of what you just said, I am open to perhaps going with larger amounts, provided that we got ample time and opportunity to vet those applicants before we make those larger awards. So that's something that I'm open to, and I'd like feedback from the board on what your thoughts are, and kind of the direction that you guys think that we should. So I'm open to suggestions on how we do that. And I think the other point is to the point of cutting recipients off that haven't submitted all the required documents within a certain amount of time. I think that's probably a good idea, so that we don't have lines in the water, so to speak, with things that we've got from previous cycles that still hadn't been tied up, and now you're pulling staff resources trying to, figure out what happened back then because somebody might have gotten awarded something and didn't get their paperwork in, and now, right, that holds up the process moving forward. So I am in favor of that, but I'm open to feedback from the board on that point as well. So does anybody have any comments or thoughts on that?
I always think that we always need to make use our support systems time in the highest and best use. And I believe that if it can be very frustrating when you spend the time with applicants and get them all set to go, and they don't do what they need to do because they're asking for the money from us. But in some ways, I think we should be just a little bit lenient, not a whole lot, because we don't want to have staff chasing after folks for paperwork, because if they want this, they'll do what they need to do to get this. So always highest and best use.
Thank you, Ms. Sims. We have any other thoughts on either one of those points?
Ms. Sims, do you feel like if there was like a percentage or like 5 out of 6 of the items, that would suffice? Like, should we put a minimum of the amount of documents you should have submitted?
I mean, to me, if staff is asking for something in that application, those are things that that they need to make a decision, that the underwriter needs to make a decision. You think about it when, and I know I just said, we need to be a little bit lenient on some things, but you think about when you're going for financing for your home or anything else, it's not, I'm going to decide to give you 3 out of these 4 things, and then hope that the underwriter says okay and approves your mortgage, right? they're asking, for what they need. Now, if the applicant were to come back to us and say, there's some extenuating circumstance where they could not get this particular, piece of paperwork, or they need more time, I think that's where the leniency comes in a little bit. And where we can, if there's a way to help them through that, there's a way to help them through that, but that needs to be communicated back to the team.
So just for some background purposes, we provided, we had multiple group meetings that talked about what was required, and we provided a template for a scope of services, and we provided a template for the budget. And then as soon as we got scopes of services, we've gone back and forth with corrections and that kind of stuff to get it to a point where we feel comfortable that we will then send it to the attorneys, and then the attorneys, on a perfect day, don't have further tweaks, but we don't bat 100 on that, or 1,000, I guess. We bet better than 100 and less than 1,000. But we definitely do want to work with the recipients because it's a different language sometimes, and other funding that they're getting. So that's not really. I mean, I'm open to doing that, and I'll continue to do that. Where we sometimes have some issues is when they're not sending us anything, and if you haven't sent, maybe it's 4 months after the grant notice. If you haven't sent us a draft scope of services and a draft budget, we'll consider you canceling this interest. Or, but, I agree we have to work with people because nothing with the city is as easy as we think it is, right? And so, I don't want to penalize them for our process, which is a little bit slower than some other process, but we need them to be an equal partner too.
So maybe what we need to do is firm up what that actually looks like. For example, if you hadn't submitted anything after 4 months, then maybe that's the criteria. At that point, we're probably pretty certain that this may not have been as serious to you as maybe it once was. And maybe at that point, and maybe we say, just thinking out loud here, maybe we say if anything has been submitted, then we'll be more lenient. Because the goal is we want to get money out the door, right? And so the question really is, what is this balance between allowing ample time to remedy outstanding issues versus what Ms. Sims said earlier with making highest and best use of our time at the same time, right? That's really the question. How do we frame that up and create the criteria? So that's something for us to think about for the next meeting. And so if everybody would kind of give some thought to that as to what we think that should look like, just to make sure that we're streamlining the process as much as we can, while making sure we keep the process moving forward for the folks that are engaged in submitting documents. I think that would be helpful.
And that's probably something we would write up in the notification letters. So we don't need to know that, for the NOFA announcements, but certainly by, once we make the awards, we should have an answer to that.
Okay.
I do think that we were definitely in a as a new board member, a 2-year term, it was a very strange, odd, with the pandemic going on. And a lot of going on with economic development, trying to do other things, and other people transitioning into the roles in economic development. By the time the recipients filled out all their paperwork and all those things, a lot of it had already, was not, timelines were incorrect, things like that. So I could understand if I was getting a award letter 5 months later and, well, my timeline's already over. So I think this year's a do-over, that we're going to do a better job for, people putting in applications and putting the time into make the city better and wanting to do good things for the community.
Thanks for that point, Ms. Mecca. And I think that's a great point, number one. And I think what we're talking about in this particular case is for the folks that have already gone into the system, right? And just to put a bow on this, is there any objection to us opening up the new cycle January 1st of next year?
No.
Is everyone okay with that?
I think it gives months.
Any opposed to that?
I'm not necessarily opposed, but I thought Heather, Ms. Lepeska had suggested October. Did you?
Last year, the information session started in October. I think we probably want another meeting, or we need some feedback on how to market it. And so I think that opening it in October seems a little bit rushed, but
Yes.
so I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
And I think we
Yes.
want good results and we want strong proposals. And I think, getting really high quality proposals and things that we could fund at, where you feel really comfortable funding them should also be a goal. But again, I'm open to whatever you direct me to do. But I think we want to have had some discussion about how we get the word out a little bit more before we open up that NOFA period.
So is it information October, NOFA period starting January?
We could do that.
Well, I think what I would say yes, if we had a firm marketing plan lined up in terms of outreach, in terms of what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. And right now, we just don't have that, which is the challenge that we've run into in the past, is that, we really hadn't had any structure. We just said, okay, the window's open now. And then it's left up to us just individually in a one-off situation to just kind of verbally, word of mouth, try to tell people, hey, you know what, you can come in and apply for funding and do it that way. So I think it would benefit us to figure out, which is one of the action items that I'm going to lead into for us to close up, for us to figure out what the marketing campaign looks like, what the outreach strategy looks like. First of all, I'd like us to have, if we can get together some sort of a one-pager, some sort of collateral for the South Dallas Fair Park Opportunity Fund, so that when we're out talking to people, we're not sitting here trying to explain it to them. We can, but we also have something that we can send them that's a one-pager, right? Or if we're talking to somebody who can direct us to someone that they would know would be a good candidate, we can send that same collateral to them to forward to the applicant so that they know exactly what the program is about. They know exactly what's available to them in terms of funding, and they have a clear sense of what to do to get in that application pipeline. I think once we solve for those two things, I think now we're in a position to go out and say, okay, let's start the campaign, and then let's set a hard date to open the window to actually receive applications. And so that's the direction that I'm leaning, and that's kind of the idea that I have. Does anybody have any objections to that or any thoughts on that?
I actually really love the idea, and I like what you said in terms of even just considering a third-party marketing service, even if it's just something that we bounce ideas off of, or maybe just not even user service, but taking a time to actually figure out what it is that we're going to do to get the word out. Because, I mean, you can have an event at the American Airlines Center, but if no one knows about it, it doesn't mean anything.
How are we, how is the Opportunity Fund collaborating with the PIO office?
And they'll certainly put releases out for us. We can use their channels and all of that. And they can help with collateral too and make it kind of city branded. But it's a little bit slow, to be completely honest. So we need to, if we have requests, we need to make sure that we build in a lead time for that.
And just to recap, Heather, I believe you said you would check to see if we can actually find somebody third party to get in to help us out with that process. I think that'd be very helpful. And just to be respectful of everybody's time, we'll start to wrap this up. I know that previously we had broken ourselves up into a couple of committees. One committee was focused on awareness, the marketing piece that we're talking about, and a second committee was dedicated to sort of the business development part of it. So I'll reach out to everybody individually to see which committee you'd like to be a part of. And what I'd like to do for the next meeting is, if you're on, for example, if you're on the awareness committee and you're on the marketing committee, please come up with your best ideas as to what we can do to create some sort of a structured marketing plan. I'd like us to have a discussion about what that looks like at our next meeting so that we can firm that up and then move forward with actually implementing whatever it is we decide as a group. Secondarily, if you're on the business development side, I would ask that everybody please be on the lookout and keep on your radar anybody that you think may be a candidate for our program, whether that be directly or whether that be through somebody that may know someone who can come into the channel. I know we've had a couple of inquiries come in here over the last 30 or 60 days in terms of interest. So I think if we can keep that momentum going, I think that would be very helpful. And I'd like to next time have a robust conversation about, again, primarily what our marketing plan is in terms of what does our collateral look like, and then what's going to be our print and media strategy going forward. Because by our next meeting, we should have some information on whether we can third party that out to somebody. And if we can't, then we know that we've got to go another route. But we'll have that information next time. But what I really want to have in place is what the plan is going to be and what the actual marketing is going to look like, so that we can start plugging away at getting some traction. So with that said, does anybody else have any closing thoughts or comments? I want to be respectful of everybody's time. I appreciate everybody being on. Does anybody have anything else they want to add before we wrap?
One question for Heather as she
Yeah.
goes back and she does research for us. See if the city will allow us to do a display ad versus an ad in the, you may already do this already, versus an ad in the legal notices section for your NOFAs.
So the NOFA, I don't think is subject to, because it's not an RFP, so it would be a different process. So I think we could do whatever we would best want to do, because it's not the traditional procurement process is dictated by procurement.
All right, do we have any other closing thoughts or comments? All right, if not, we will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion that we adjourn the meeting.
Is there a second?
that.
Oh boy, there was a lot of seconds. Somebody raise their hand so we can write it down in minutes. Who wants to claim it?
Michelle Macca seconds that. The motion
Awesome. Thank
to
you.
adjourn.
Okay. All in favor?
Thank you.
All right.
Oh, all in favor? Yeah. Aye.
Any opposed to adjourning? All right, meeting is adjourned. The time is 7:12. Thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Yeah.
Ready?